The Story of My Life by Helen Keller. You may be wondering why I read this book. It's because I've always been intrigued by the character of Helen Keller. She seemed to be like a very interesting historical figure, and I decided I would pick up her autobiography of her early life. I didn't realize it was just about her early life. She actually wrote this, I believe, in college, so she was very young when she wrote this. But nevertheless, even though it's only like 74 pages, very interesting. I primarily wanted to read it because I thought, man, wouldn't it be fascinating to read a book written by a woman who was both blind and deaf? Like, that's crazy. And as it turns out, she's a really good writer. And I'm going to read a couple of passages from the book to illustrate that, because she really, I mean, golly, she was smart and very, very insightful. By the way, what I also learned from this book is she was not, contrary to popular belief, she was not the first person to learn how to speak and write while being both deaf and blind. There was actually another woman that she had learned about while she was alive, named Reginald Kata, a girl in Norway who learned how to speak even though she was deaf and blind. I don't exactly know why Helen Keller became the most famous for it. I think maybe she was the first American to do it. And also, since this is only about her early life, I'm willing to bet that, I just am quite ignorant of the achievements that she made. And so I do want to read another book on Helen Keller, a more comprehensive biography. But I do find it interesting that, she was not the first one to do it. But I guess over the course of her life, through this book and through other things, she became famous for it. Not only because she's American, but also because she was, I guess, more brilliant and profound than the other girl. I don't know, but I did not know that she was not the first one. But no, like, I definitely recommend this read. It's incredibly short, as you can see. I mean, that's very, very thin. But it's important to read books like this just to see that you have so much. And even when you have so little, like, she had very little as far as, most of her senses were taken from her. And yet she still managed to live quite an incredible life. And that's a testament to, whatever circumstances you're going through, just remember, at least you're not deaf and blind. Unless you are deaf and blind. And then that's another matter. But most people are not deaf and blind. So I don't know. You got to remember, it's kind of like reading this book reminds me that someone always has it worse than I do. And so I might as well not bitch and complain about things. Anyways, I'd like to jump into a couple of passages that I think are just really beautiful. Like, she describes, obviously, her teacher, Anne Sullivan, played a huge role in her education and her ability. Honestly, Anne Sullivan is, in large part, the reason for why Helen Keller is the Helen Keller that we know today. She changed Helen Keller's life, and whenever Miss Sullivan first arrived, Helen Keller describes that moment as basically being this. Thus I came up out of Egypt and stood before Sinai, and a power divine touched my spirit and gave it sight, so that I beheld many wonders. And from the sacred mountain I heard a voice which said, knowledge is love, and light and vision. That is how Helen Keller describes the incredibleness, that's not a word, but that's how she describes basically what it was like to have Anne Sullivan come into her life and just basically allow her to see, even if she didn't have eyes, and hear, even though she doesn't have functional ears. It's pretty wild, and as I said, it's beautiful writing. Now, this is another beautiful little passage that this is about how Helen, she first really learned how to conceive of what thinking was, like, just as a concept of love. And this is just, it's beautiful writing, and what Anne Sullivan says to her is It's very profound, so I just like to read that passage. A day or two afterward, I was stringing beads of different sizes in symmetrical groups. 2 large beads, 3 small ones, and so on. I had made many mistakes, and Miss Sullivan had pointed them out again and again with gentle patience. Finally, I noticed a very obvious error in the sequence, and for an instant I concentrated my attention on the lesson and tried to think how I should have arranged the beads. Miss Sullivan touched my forehead and spelled with decided emphasis, "Think." In a flash, I knew that the word was the name of the process that was going on in my head. This was my first conscious perception of an abstract idea. For a long time I was still. I was not thinking of the beads in my lap, but trying to find a meaning for love in the light of this new idea. The sun had been under a cloud all day, and there had been brief showers, but suddenly the sun broke forth in all its southern splendor. Again I asked my teacher, "Is this not love?" And then Anne Sullivan speaking. "Love is something like the clouds that were in the sky before the sun came out," she replied. Then in simpler words than these, which at that time I could not have understood, she explained, "You cannot touch the clouds, you know, but you feel the rain and know how glad the flowers and the thirsty earth are to have it after a hot day. You cannot touch love either, but you feel the sweetness that it pours into everything. Without love, you would not be happy or want to play." The beautiful truth burst upon my mind. I felt that there were invisible lines stretched between my spirit and the spirits of others. It's just like, damn, this girl just had some like serious knowledge bestowed upon her by a woman that can see and hear, and even though they have that giant thing that is so not relatable between them, she was able to learn from Anne Sullivan. Oh yeah, there's a really interesting thing in this book that's I'm not going to spoil it. I suggest that you read it, but I'll talk about this one chapter where it describes how Helen Keller, at one point when she was young, she wrote a story called the Frost King, and as it turns out, she had accidentally plagiarized this story because when she was a younger child, she had been read a story called, I believe, I can't remember what the story was called, but it was another story written by an author, a children's author. And Helen had not heard that, but had that read to her by, I think, drawing on her hand, or maybe she had learned how to use Braille at this point. I can't remember exactly, but she had read that story earlier in her life, and without her knowing it, since she has no sensory stuff coming in, that story manifested itself in her own mind to the point where she thought it was her own story. And it caused a big problem because she presented to some of her teachers at school, and they thought it was brilliant, and they found out it was kind of plagiarized, but she unintentionally plagiarized it. But it was what a weird thing. It's just reading had such an influence on her. It was just it was like lightning coming into her brain, and it seared this story in there to the point where she thought it was organically hers. It's wild. And the only, she, she was really funny too, and she was also really blunt, like I said, this is the first 20 or so years of her life. And she wrote about going to college. She said, "One goes to college to learn, it seems, not to think." Couldn't agree more. I think that's largely how it is in college. I am there, and I don't know, critical thinking is not really a thing that's fostered much anymore. It's more just memorize this, believe it, and then forget about questioning it. It's weird. Now, again, this is a passage, for me, reading proved to me the meaning of the statement, knowledge is power, more than anything else in my life. And to Helen Keller, it was kind of the same thing, except for, obviously, to a higher degree, because reading kind of literally expanded her every horizon. But she writes about knowledge here, and she kind of extrapolates upon that whole old saying, knowledge is power, and it's beautiful, it's powerful, and it'll be the last thing I read from the book, and you can read the rest of the book and find the gems within that I have not addressed. But anyways, knowledge is power. Rather, knowledge is happiness, because to have knowledge, broad, deep knowledge, is to know true ends from false, and lofty things from low. To know the thoughts and deeds that have marked man's progress is to feel the great heart-throbs of humanity through the centuries. And if one does not feel in these pulsations a heavenward striving, one must indeed be deaf to the harmonies of life. Voila. Couldn't say it better. Ladies and gentlemen, I think The Story of My Life by Helen Keller is I highly recommend that you read it. I don't know if I can really give it a grade, but if I did, I would say, I guess my grade is that it's worth reading and that it's very cool. So read it.